welcome to our last night. This is our last live event for the Rockland Arts Festival. I want to remind everybody that you have time to visit the festival website to see the 175 plus visual artists and vote for your favorites. Um, I don't have to remind anybody about the free virtual events because this is the last one. So that's www.rocklandartsfestival.org. And this festival is made possible with funds from the Decentralization Program, a re-grant program of the New York State Council of the Arts, with the support of Governor Cuomo, the New York State Legislature, Arts Westchester, and PFLAG Rockland. Okay, I did that very good this time. So this is our last live event, and I want to thank everybody who's joined us for these wonderful nights of art. If anyone has questions, please feel free to put them into the chat, and we will read them off at the end of the night. I want to also ask that our guests tonight put their social media info and website address in the comments so our audience will be able to follow you all. So welcome to our literature and film discussion with Joe Allen, Bill Batson, and Cheryl Vaughn. Joe Allen is a documentary filmmaker of There Was No Silence, about how a small community, JCC, joined with the family members of the Munich 11 to push the hand of the International Olympic Committee to hold a minute of silence in their honor at the opening of the Olympic Games. Two Schools in Hillburn, a documentary about how the community in Hillburn, New York, ended the Jim Crow laws of separate but equal in the New York State education system in 1943. Hudson Valley Honor Flight, Generation Bridge, about the organization that brings mostly World War II and Korean War veterans to Washington, D.C. for a day of celebration in their honor. Empty Cupboards, about hunger in our midst and what various entities are doing to solve the problem. Bill Batson is a writer, artist, and activist. Bill has worked for nonprofits, labor unions, and government in New York State as an organizer, writer, and public relations specialist. He curated African Americans in the NYACs 1800 to present for Historical Society of the NYACs. In 2018, he directed the NYAC Record Shop Project, a community component of the Carrie Mae Weems exhibit at the Edward Hopper House that collected 36 oral histories of the local African American community. Bill's writing has appeared in Essence Magazine, New York's Amsterdam News, and the Argus in Cape Town, South Africa. And Cheryl Vaughn, who is our moderator tonight. Cheryl is the executive director of the Arts Council of Rockland. Cheryl is a successful nonprofit fundraising professional who has worked at and volunteered for nonprofit organizations for 20 years. Over the course of her career, she has led a variety of organizations ranging from grassroots groups to well-established institutions, and has worked with many causes, from immigrants' rights to healthcare. In the late 90s, a love and appreciation for the arts was ignited when Cheryl, who was a member of a Filipino indigenous performing arts troupe in New York City, Cheryl continues her artistic passion in the vibrant arts community of Rockland County. Wow, okay. So we've got some great guests tonight. So hopefully everyone enjoys. I am going to hand it over to Cheryl, who is going to moderate with Joe and Bill. Cheryl?
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much to the Rockland Arts Festival Um, there are so many wonderful events that took place that I only got to get to a few of them. So I'm thrilled that they're going to be available on YouTube. Got a lot of catching up to do. So I'm really honored to be here. It's like one of those things where I'm like, I don't know how I got in this mix here, but I'm thrilled to be here with Joe and Bill. And I'll just try not to get in the way, and I'll try to keep the conversation flowing. And I think we're going to have a great conversation. Just, just to kind of start things off, I think what's exciting about this combination of artists that we have tonight, I know for me, like, I'm not an artist, but art has always played a role in my life personally as a way to either express something that I didn't know how to say or express, or to help me get to that point, right? Like I don't always know what I'm thinking or how to feel about something. And then, I find it when I view how other people express these things through art. And so I'm super thrilled to do that with these two amazing people tonight. And I'm going to stop talking because I want to hear from both of them. So just so everyone knows how this is going to go, we're going to have Joe is going to give us a little bit, do a little presentation, and tell us about his work, and then we'll have a little bit of a conversation, and then we'll move to Bill, and we'll do the same thing, and then hopefully we'll have some time at the end, and we'll see what other questions come through the chat. So that's it for me for now, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me tonight, and it's a terrific kick to be on a panel with Bill Batson, who is truly a Renaissance man in the county, one we're lucky to have. His writings and his activism are well known, and I'm appreciative to be, at least on my Zoom, I'm right next to you, Bill. So thank you very much, and good luck with yours after mine. One of the things that motivates me more than anything else is history. And within history, there are a number of different facets in that. And one is the fact that on a day-to-day basis, we are walking in the same space that others have walked in. And we don't know for how long, and we don't know where it began, but the same space you're occupying and we're all occupying today, somebody else occupied that space before us. And many people did, whether it's this house in Stony Point or where you are, or the roads we travel, or the places that we've gone to. It is a rich collection of our ancestors that have come together and created the spot that we now stand in. And it's the same thing as we look forward. Our descendants are going to look upon this and say, yeah, I was here when in the same spot that Cheryl was in or Lisa was in. You know, there's a transition part of life, and it goes from where we were to where we're headed, and we're only in the middle of it. So that's one thing. And the second thing that's really exciting about doing documentary work is the fact that you get an opportunity to tell and listen to first-person stories of events that are significant but are fading away. And I'll give you an example of that. We all know that World War II veterans are passing at such a great rate, and we're almost through. They've all almost gone to the ages by now. So the fact that I had the wonderful opportunity to spend a great deal of time with our World War II veterans and other veterans as well, Korea and Vietnam. But the idea that here you had the lions of our culture that were out and did the stuff that made our life free, and the ones before me had a brand new start because of what the World War veterans did, and the ones before all of us. So there's that great connection, and there's also the connection for events that took place that will soon be forgotten if we don't be careful of that, such as the tragedy in Munich during the Olympics when 11 Israeli athletes, coaches, and officials were murdered by Black September in one of the first large-scale mass media covered type of terrorist attack. So without telling that story and without that being out there, it's very possible that an event like that begins to be forgotten. And in Rockland County, the JCC in Rockland hooked up with the families of the 11 Munich murdered athletes and said, we won't allow the International Olympic Committee to forget you. And they banded with the families and they fought the IOC and in an effort to get a minute of silence for their loved ones at the London Olympics. They'd been trying since 1972 to no avail, and in London it came close. But I'll touch upon, there was two schools in Hilburn first. That was an event, that was a film that really took place in Hilburn. And it's a story that many people in Rockland County don't know. I didn't know about it. We have a very rich, diverse history in this county. And one of the most diverse parts of this county was Hilburn. And for many years, there was a Jim Crow segregation situation where children of color went to one school, a ramshackle old piece of crap that was there, and that had 2 years of school in one classroom and no indoor plumbing and no facilities. And the other school, which is a relatively brand new school with all the things you would need for education, a library and a gym and a cafeteria and a beautiful place, and only the white kids could go there. And that's the way it was for a couple of decades until a number of very strong women in Hilburn in 1943 said, enough, we're not going to take it anymore. And one of the things that they had done in their declaration of we're not going to take it was to bring in a young attorney who was just really getting started, and that was Thurgood Marshall. And Thurgood Marshall came up here and really did the job and helped turn what was a very active Jim Crow environment in education in New York and made it illegal. And from that point on, the segregation was formally eliminated. But what was interesting is that Thurgood Marshall had said that much of what he needed to learn about how school boards would handle him when he argued Brown versus Board of Education before the Supreme Court, he learned through the work that he had to do against the boards of education right here in Hilburn. So it's a major story in the civil rights movement in our country. It's right up there with many of the other major moments in the civil rights struggle. So I was very honored to work on that. But there were things I didn't know about what happened in Hilburn in that time, and a lot of people didn't. So what I'd like to do now is I'd like to play a little bit of it, and then we'll talk about it on the other side. So as instructed, share a screen. And this, I hope this is it. Okay.
Look at the complexion of Hilburn. It really mirrored what was happening in other communities at other times. There was a period during the 1920s when there was a resurgence of the KKK on the national level. And there were elements of that in Suffern and Hilburn as well. The unfortunate thing is that they were able to influence certain members of the community to utilize the Presbyterian Church in Hilburn to meet there. And there were times where crosses had been burned.
In 1912, what would become Ramapo Central School District built a new school, the main school in Hilburn. It was a school for white children only. The colored children in the community had attended the Brooks School since the 1880s. And that would not change. The main school was well appointed, had indoor plumbing, athletic facilities, a library, and other amenities that made going to school easier for the white children. For the colored children, there was no indoor plumbing for restrooms, no recreation facilities or places to read. Kids needing the bathroom had to go outside in all seasons, in any kind of weather. Classrooms were hopelessly overcrowded with multiple grades housed per classroom.
Growing up in Brook School, I knew that it wasn't much fun to go to school in. No indoor bathrooms. And this certainly wasn't true with my home. We had all the conveniences. And to go to school and have to use the outdoor bathrooms was probably the worst thing that happened. There was a barber shop, and in a sign in a barber shop, no colored allowed. And that was point blank. That was right out in front of you. You could see that. There were many other things where we just knew.
It was very much segregated. We had crosses burned on our properties. We were called names. We had no rights. It was just, we didn't realize that that was wrong because that's what life was at that time. But when our parents decided it was time to change, this is when the school problem became, started to go.
In the community, you actually knew your place as a person of color. You knew where you weren't supposed to go or how you were supposed to speak. Whites were in control.
What's now the Fountain Park was a great skating area, and we did not skate there. The Native Americans and African Americans did not skate there until finally some people, including my father, decided that shouldn't be anymore.
Okay, thank you to the people that appeared in the film. One of the things that stood out most was once you started talking about what happened back then, the students that we were lucky enough to have who were still alive and were still in the area, their memories just opened up like a faucet was turned on. And I found that to be the case every time you do a documentary about some history. The idea, for example, that World War II veterans, many of whom saw the worst possible things that you can imagine, and I'll add Korea to that, and I'll add Vietnam to that, and you find people who are absolutely ready to go. All you have to do is get them starting to talk. And what I've discovered along the way is one of the ways that we like to shoot a documentary. The cinematographer on my films, Chris Kenley, perfected this concept of going after the eyes. And that's what we try to do in everything we shoot. We want, the eyes are the windows of the world, to your soul, or where, you know what I mean. So we tried very hard to capture the personalities of people through their eyes. And once you do that, you really do capture people. And whether it's the situation of diversity in Rockland County, or whether it's a World War II veteran who wants to tell his story and is not sure, so you focus in on that person and pretty soon he gives you everything. And when you're dealing with an elderly population, you really don't want to corner them. You don't want to play a gotcha game with them. You just want them to begin to unroll the blanket that they have. And that's what we did. When it came to There Was No Silence, and you're dealing about a historical situation that anyone can just go on Google and look up, and there'd be an endless number of things about it. The idea that there were two widows who fought for 40 years to get the International Olympic Committee to believe in their husbands and want to give them and the others a minute of silence. So I'm going to play some of that, and then I know that my time will be done, and maybe we'll come back to it a little later. So screen share, got it. Anki Spitzer and Alana Romano have continued to face off against the IOC, despite both women having gone on to lead full
We can't see your
You're not,
screen.
yeah, you're not on screen share.
CC and
It,
David
it
Kirsch
doesn't show Joe as a host anymore.
allied with Anki and
Okay,
Alana.
that's good.
He has continually pushed
Might have when he ended screen share, it might have switched host away because it's not showing him as a host.
Anki
That's-
Spitzer
I'm still on multiple participants though.
face off.
Okay, so tell me what to do.
What happened when you hit share screen? Did it? There you go.
Okay.
Anki Spitzer and Alana Romano have continued to face off against the IOC, despite both women having gone on to lead full and productive lives. The JCC and David Kirschtel have continued to remain closely allied with Anki and Alana. He has continually pushed for the minute of silence denied to the widows in 2012 and 2016.
There was no silence. And because they couldn't give us 1 minute of silence, they've got a whole lot to look forward to in terms of loud voices speaking up, making certain that in 2020 there will be silence.
The next games are in Tokyo in 2020, and the families and their partners are once again prepared to take the fight to the IOC. In retrospect, JCC Rockland embarked on a mission few believed had any chance of success. Despite not seeing an actual minute of silence, the effort brought people all around the world together and caused enough agitation in the hallways of the IOC that 8 years after London, the moment of silent acknowledgement at the opening ceremonies is closer than ever.
I think there's a presumption that when something big needs doing, somebody big needs to do it. Or if it's going to be done right, it has to be done methodically and deliberately and with a huge amount of preparation and planning. I think what we find in life is that moments come that offer an opportunity to stand up and be counted. And we're not always sure how it's going to go or how we're going to do it, but when we recognize the moment and step into it, we begin to explore the possibility of doing things that we never thought were possible. I think that's the story of the Rockland JCC and its work on behalf of the families of the Munich 11. I think that tells every community everywhere that we should be ready when the moment comes to stand up and be counted if there's a chance to lead and do right.
Neither the families in Israel nor JCC Rockland in the U.S. have any intention of walking away until the minute of silence is held. In the Olympic Stadium, during the opening ceremonies, and in front of the entire world.
It was one of the most exciting times I've ever dealt with because we actually made a worldwide impact.
There may have been no minute of silence at the London Olympics, but there was no silence.
Okay. And what that film did, that documentary did, was to just demonstrate that you never give up on something. If you're trying to move your world, you've got to keep going and adjust it and keep fighting and keep going with it. I know it sounds cliched, but Anki Spitzer and Alana Romano and their families didn't stop working this from 1972 until now. The Olympics in Tokyo are going to go on, I believe, although I don't know for sure. Quite a blow when they were canceled last year. So I don't know whether there'll be a minute of silence this year. But I can tell you this, nobody has an ounce of give in them. So we'll be back again, or they'll be back again if it has to go to 2024. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I'll turn it back to you, Cheryl.
Great. Wow. oh my gosh, I have like pages of notes from prior to this moment. And then I was furiously writing things down as I was watching and listening to you. You know, I just wanted to say something quickly about Two Schools in Hilburn. I think so many things that are amazing about the work, but what I found really interesting, and I don't know if it's just because I'm more attuned to it these days, but what a great job it does of really illustrating the systemic racism. You know, like, I mean, even in like the direct quotes from some of the people, you know, there was this one, this direct quote, right, from, I think, who was the guy who said that he was speaking on behalf of the white community, right? And this quote, because I think people find this interesting, the Negroes don't have enough taxes to support even one teacher. I have nothing against the colored people. Many are my fine friends, but you know what Negroes do to the value of real estate in a community. Like, you know, this is back in, you know, and this is still going on. And so I think the film did a really great job of really bringing to light the, you know, the systemic issues. But I do
Makes
have
you sad that to think that we've come a long way, but we really have not come that far.
exactly. And it seems like more and more, it's like some of this that was in the 40s. If some of the things that are happening today, it's kind of like, wow. And I'm sure people are seriously exhausted having to continue to fight for this. So for these things.
You know, you mentioned the systemic racism. There's a story in the film. Travis Jackson, who was in this clip, talks about a time where he had won. He was in the Honor Society, and they had an event, a little party to honor them in a restaurant, and they all went there, and they were in this restaurant, and there was dancing going on, and a young girl asked Travis to dance, and he said, "No, I don't know how to dance. I really can't." And then the reason he said that is he looked to the side, and there was a window with no glass, but a window to the bar, and there were quite a few white men who were standing in the bar, and he said, "The last thing I need is to be dancing with a white girl in this event." And just the fact that he had to say that really was just painful, and it was so revealing on the systemic all around you racism that existed back then and clearly exists today still. So
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask one more question, and then we'll move on to Bill. I haven't seen in its entirety, There Was No Silence, but I have seen Two Schools in Hilburn. My question, it has to do with the fact that, you know, Two Schools in Hilburn, you're telling a story of, while of course in some ways that story continues in a lot of ways, but you're looking at a historical event that happened, we kind of know the outcome. And then when you look at There Was No Silence, you sort of were following along as something was unfolding. And we don't know what the outcome will be. Does your process change at all when you're telling stories, you know, that are different in that way?
I think, well, you know, There Was No Silence had a story that did have a conclusion. That was they were kidnapped, they were killed, the families came together, united to fight this. So first half, you know what happened. Second half, we don't know what happened. It came so close in London. We went to London to have a meeting with the International Olympic Committee, where we brought with us a petition that had 120,000 names of people all over the world who said, "We demand a minute of silence." And we went into the office of the International Olympic Committee president, and we were able to say to him, "Sir, there's 120,000 people in these pages, and I know because I carried the petition all the way to to London, and there are 120,000 people who say you're wrong, and they demand that we have a minute of silence." Now, it didn't get us a minute of silence,
it got us real close. And the best we had was Bob Costas doing a 7 seconds of silence during his broadcast of the Israeli team marching in. That was a big deal for us, but we really believe it's going to happen.
Thank you so much. I know there's more questions, so we'll hopefully we'll come back, and we'll hear from Bill, and then we'll continue the conversation. So, thank you, Joe.
Thank you.
So I'm going to begin screen share. Let's see if this works. Can you see my screen? Thank you. So I really admire Joe Allen for many reasons, but particularly his focus and the discipline of a documentarian. The years and years that it takes to put together the projects that he works on, and the way that he stays with the people and the subject matter. I'm also connected with Joe because my grandmother was one of the teachers at the Brooks School for Colored Children. So I'm deeply connected to that story and the power it still represents for us. And just an aside, one of the many events that his work inspired, the naming of a section of Route 17, the Thurgood Marshall Way, Expressway. I think it was Dr. James Montesano, the superintendent of Nyack Schools, who pointed out, as horrible as it is to realize this, that American schools are more segregated today than they were during Brown versus Board of Education. So the work of activism goes on, and the work of artists who are activists goes on. So I've conflated the terms. I'm not going to have the same discipline that that Joe did. He's a documentarian. I'm a columnist. I'm a weekly columnist. I have a different topic every week. And when Cheryl asked the question, how do you use your art as activism? I came up with a literal, I think, definition for it. And I'm going to show some slides that demonstrate things that are might appear overtly art related, things that might appear overtly activist related. But in my mind, my art is always inspired or informed by my activism, and my activism is always informed by my art. So that's what I hope to show you, some literal examples of how I've used my art as activism and my activism as art. So in 1987, you know, I think I have this glory day problem, the glory days. I honestly believe that this is the most important thing I've ever done. In 1987, I was a 23-year-old, I think, sitting in the office at the New York City Housing Authority, and it just so happened that the director of the Housing Authority walked past. And you know, the New York City Housing Authority is enormous. It's about 600,000 tenants, so it's the size of a city, all in vertical buildings throughout the 5 boroughs. And he walked over to me and he said, "What do you do?" I said, "Well, I'm the arts coordinator." And he goes, "Well, I didn't know we had one of those. What are your plans for your program?" And I said, "Well, I'm not prepared for this conversation. Just met you, but give me a day." So the next day I walked in and I made this recommendation that they create an art school. And it's called the Harborview Art School. It still exists. I realized that, you know, 600,000 tenants and 63 buildings spread across 5 boroughs, we can never get artists in there. And I knew that as an artist myself, art transforms individuals and communities. So I wanted to inject art into the school system, into the housing authority. So what we did is we trained the staff, community center staff, to make art. And we gave them all the supplies, we gave them all the instruction. We actually even gave them an art school. And these folks that were not artists found taking an arts and crafts class incredibly, I think, refreshing. It was good art therapy. We couldn't get them out. It was extra time. They had to come at the end of the day. They were very hardworking people, very tired. But it really was transformative in the housing authority. And I'm so proud that that project still exists. At the time, I was a housing organizer as an activist, but as an artist, I used my interest in culture to create this program. Around the same time, I got more involved in activism, and I went in 1988 to the Democratic National Convention in Atlanta, Georgia, as a communications person. That's when I started to learn about political communications. So this was a newsletter that I put together, The Arrival of the Superdelegates. It was a cartoonist whose work I used. It was my first time on a computer in 1988. Most people didn't have one. It took me 24 hours to do something that should have taken me 2 hours, but since nobody had ever worked on a computer, they thought I had an incredible work ethic. So I became involved in politics after that. Jesse Jackson, if we remember, in 1988 won New York City, which was a big deal. So people knew that there could be a Black mayor in New York City. So I quickly went to the campaign for David Dinkins. With my background in the arts, I was part of the communications and the marketing team. So I was involved in finding the artist Sandy Alnock, who created this logo, which became the logo for the first Dinkins campaign. The 89 campaign, it was an exciting time. Every community in New York came together. He used to call it the gorgeous mosaic of New York. I was very involved in the campaign. That's me. I guess that's by his right foot. I was his right foot man, I guess, at a rally in Lower Manhattan. It's very exciting to be a part of the Dinkins campaign. And it really started a lifelong interest for me in electoral politics, as you'll see a little bit later. But I was also interested, like Joe, in history. So in 1990, I spent some years studying in Massachusetts, and I helped create this thing called Project Hip Hop, which stood for Highways into the Past, History, Organizing, and Power. Very simple paradigm. We brought young people down south to learn about the civil rights movement from people who were in the civil rights movement. It was extraordinarily, once again, transformative experience. That's my drawing. So often I tend to illustrate the projects I'm working on. It's a really compelling moment for me in the civil rights movement, and something that people really don't remember. In Birmingham, Alabama, one of the civil disobedience techniques is to fill the jails so that they can't really arrest anybody else for civil disobedience. You kind of exhaust the other side. So in Birmingham, they ran out of high school students, they ran out of middle school students, and the elementary school students volunteered to get arrested. And that was the moment when Dr. King called up Lyndon Baines Johnson and said, you know, you really need to do something here or it's going to get really bad. So learning about this history is very powerful, and you know, bringing young people down south was really something that was very, very, very memorable. I also brought some young people to South Africa, a similar examination of the anti-apartheid struggle. But while I was there, I wrote an essay. And this is when I started to use more the words and literature and instead of just visual arts. So I wrote an essay for this newspaper, Cape Argus, where I basically said that the apartheid government had taken away land from Black people, forced removals, kind of like the urban renewal project that came through NIAC. And sadly, the South Africans learned about forced removals from the United States. The South Africans in the 50s and 60s sent members of the National Party to the United States to study urban renewal. And they brought back their own version, which was harsher, but had the same intent, to remove people of color from valuable real estate. So this part of District 6 was cleared in Cape Town, South Africa. And when Mandela became president, they were considering how to give back the land to the individuals who were forcibly removed. But since time had gone by and a lot of the people who had lived there had died, I just asked, maybe you should reconsider private ownership for this spot. Maybe this spot should become special and it should be owned by everybody, since there was an attempt to remove just one race from it. I didn't want to see it fall back into the hands of developers, because the intent could be bring back people who lived there, but then it starts to get sold and eventually it would change. So that essay was seen by the District 6 Museum. And for 2 years, I got to work on a project that really celebrated activism at a museum by using the visual arts. Another slide I could have shown here is the floor of the museum was turned into a giant map. So the people who used to live in District 6 could walk into this giant space and literally walk down the streets where they used to live. The next example is back in New York City. I was asked to put together some events to challenge the notion that when Mike Bloomberg wanted to have nonpartisan elections. So I created this thing called a Millionaires March for Mike. I got a lot of friends to dress up like the Monopoly guy, and pretty easy to do, top hat and a cigar. The trick was, we also got a limousine, and my friend Greg stuck his head out of the limousine as it drove around City Hall, throwing out money that was kind of like a pamphlet. They had the information about our anti-nonpartisan election campaign on it. And the power of communication and the power of using images and words is really what media is all about right now. It's really what corporations use to change behavior. So for, I think, a grand total of $80, we managed to get a couple $100,000 worth of free media, because we were on all the newspapers, we were on all the radio stations, we were in all the TV, and really we were using the power of art and creativity. And some of the actions were a little bit more aggressive and not really visual, not having anything to do with the visual arts at all, but really using the tenets of the civil rights movement, but also putting a twist on them. So many people know that New York instituted some very draconian measures called the Rockefeller drug laws. So I was able to encourage a member of the Rockefeller family, Mela Rockefeller, to submit to an act of civil disobedience and to get arrested with then State Senator David Patterson, who eventually became governor. I was on the senator's staff. And then once again, a very simple act with a lot of symbolism, but we got in front of millions of people in New York City. Everyone knew, wow, a Rockefeller got arrested is a headline right there, but got arrested protesting her grandfather's drug laws. And since then, of course, now we're a state, one of the 15 who's decriminalized or legalized marijuana. So a lot of progress can be made through protest and through creative protest. So all this time I kept drawing. I never stopped with having a sketch pad. A friend of mine who I met in the media, Merrill English, who was a reporter from Newsday, one day had a photographer follow me home because I drew every time I took a subway ride. So I have thousands and thousands of these drawings. You can see the drawings below. That's me up above with my sketch pad, surreptitiously sneaking in a sketch. So I've been sketch logging for decades. This is an example of one of the drawings. Very different than the work I do now. I draw buildings. Buildings never move. These folks never stay still. And then I might be getting a really good drawing going and somebody would stand in front of me. So I only had maybe, a minute, 2 minutes to do a drawing. I would take them home and create bigger works using color. So this is my work back then. People who see my work today mostly see black and white work, but this is that kind of work. I did throw my hat in the ring and became a candidate for office. I ran for the New York State Assembly. Our Attorney General, Letitia James, was one of the people who endorsed me for that office. But when you run for public office, two bad things can happen. You can win or you can lose. The implications of winning in this world are not, to be laughed at. It's a very difficult thing to have any real impact as an individual, and especially in Albany. Albany's a very interesting place. But I was, okay to move on after this. It was a great experience. I urge people who are interested in politics to run. But I moved on and I actually ended up moving back to Nyack. Around that time, my father was diagnosed with dementia, eventually Alzheimer's. So for the first year that I was back in Nyack, once again with color every day, and this was probably the most deeply personal work that I did. I did a watercolor of my father every morning for his entire 90th year. I wanted to get to know him better. I was spending time with him. I was his caretaker. And I also wanted to learn how to do watercolor. So I gave myself that assignment, posting a watercolor every day. But then I got back into my activist self. So in August of this year, I will have my 10th year anniversary for the Nyack Sketchlog. I started in August 2021. This was the first one. It's about urban renewal in Nyack. That's the house that looks like the house my family had before it was destroyed by urban renewal. My 500th column will come out in August. I am most excited when the sketchlog so the sketchlog combines my literary interests and my visual arts interests, but I'm very excited when it also becomes organizing. So I wrote about this boast that I made that I could draw every building in Nyack. I likened myself as a John Henry up against the steam-powered drill of Google. I quickly realized how incredibly ridiculous and hubristic that was. Even though this village is only, you know, a mile square, you can't really draw every square inch of it. So John Henry didn't really work as an analogy. What I needed was 100 John Henrys. So thanks to the support of the Art Council of Rockland, I got some funding and I created the Flash Sketch Mob. So this was our first gathering. There was a second one. There were some mini ones. And the drawings of hundreds of artists of Nyack creating a kind of hand-drawn Google map still exists, but it went from a sketch log to an action. Once again, that same paradigm, I did a drawing of an Underground Railroad. Well, what people thought was Underground Railroad location, but was being demolished. People came together and were concerned. Then with the bench by the road was born from that. A group of citizens came together, Francis Pratt, Willie Trotman, Jen Laird White, you see Wynn Perry there, and Toni Morrison was there on that day in 2015 when we unveiled a bench to honor an abolitionist and an entrepreneur, Cynthia Hesdra, in Memorial Park. Once again, and probably the most urgent endeavor for the sketch log, in March of last year, my colleague and I, Donna Tim, realized that we needed to do something because the cavalry wasn't coming, the supply chain had broken, the pandemic was here, and nobody had masks. So we created the Nyack Mask Makers. 400 strong came together, thanks to Dr. Geller, who quickly realized that he needed the support of his community and gave us a prototype of a mask. 400 volunteers who came together in a matter of weeks, created 16,000 masks that were distributed to 50 healthcare institutions and civic organizations throughout Rockland County in a couple of months. And many of those masks are around. I always have one nearby. This is one that Donna Tim, who's the leader of the Nyack Art Collective, she engraved this one for me. So it's powerful what art and makers can do. The project I'm working on right now is with the Mount Moore Cemetery, the Friends of Mount Moore Cemetery. I did this drawing in 2011, but then the media got involved a little bit, and I have this here. I helped them do press for an event we did on Memorial Day, and this article was seen by this gentleman here. I guess it's to my right, the gentleman with the white mask on in this photo, Bill Stump. He found out about what we were doing because we put it out there in the media, because we used our communication skills to get the message out. And Bill Stump is part of this group called the Sons of the Union Army. And he helped us fill out the applications so that all of the tombstones at Mount Moore, which is a historically Black cemetery at Palisades Mall, it was almost destroyed by the Pyramid Corporation. It still exists, but a lot of the tombstones you can't read anymore because of time and deterioration. So now, just yesterday, we erected 5 new tombstones. We have 5 more that'll go in a week or two, and we're looking to replace up to 20 of the headstones at Mount Moore. So very, very powerful, important work. Started with the sketch and an essay. Obviously, the work of the Mount Moore Cemetery has gone on and on, but by writing about them, I got interested and became more involved. I've gotten more overt sometimes. Those are more the kind of preservation issues. I used an essay as a flyer to support people who were fighting against Suez Corporation, who were building a parking lot right above Lake DeForest. The runoff from that parking lot would pollute our drinking water. So this drawing by me, but an essay by my friend and nature photographer Ray Wright was used as a flyer at one of the hearings to mobilize people. And most recently, although this is not my artistry, this is the design of Michael Lockett, but I was a steering committee member of the Rockland People's Panel on Policing. And we used the visual arts to create 3 public hearings that educated the public about the need to end racially biased over policing in Rockland County. And issued a report, and this is the incredible document. I urge people to go to Rockland People's Panel on Policing. I'm sorry, actually, it's rocklandppp.org if you'd like to see the report. And it's incredible what powerful work that images and words can do to move social movements forward. But really, what I look forward to is to continue collaborating with people like Joe Allen. One of the people that I covered in my sketch log over the years was Joe Allen. That's my drawing of the Hilburn School. I think I saw in the chat, there was a question from someone about is the Hilburn School still standing? The Brooks School is sadly not still standing, and it probably couldn't have, it probably fell on its own. I don't think it needed to be knocked down. The ruins are still there. I think they're on private property, so it'd be interesting to see if that could one day be preserved. But the Hilburn School, the fancy one that was whites only, is now an administrative building, but there's an incredible plaque outside. And I just wanted to say, and you know, at the end, that all these things, as Joe said, are you know, the history is important to remember, but the issues require internal vigilance. And sometimes rights won are harder kept. And a beautiful thing is I do believe that, Joe, you can take credit for the fact that in a couple months, a statue of Thurgood Marshall is going to go up in front of the courthouse in New City. And more people are remembering the impact of Thurgood Marshall's time here in Rockland County. So thanks to artivists like myself, and if I can include you in that title, Joe.
Thank you.
You know, we have work to continue, and we can communicate these issues with more and more people and get more and more people involved. So it's an honor to be here, and I thank you for your time.
Wow. Like, when do you sleep? I honestly, I could have sat there and listened to you, Bill, and the same with Joe. Like, I'm just sitting here like I could just stay here all night and listen to both of you talk about your work. You know what? I have so many things going through my head, but just Bill, like, one of the things that you're so masterful at connecting all of these things, you know, your work, you have the ability to, you know, have a point of view about or take a strong stand on an issue. You have the ability to give us a peek into a sense of place. You know, you have the power to educate. You do all of these things masterfully. It's incredible. And you're so prolific. Like, how, seriously, when do you sleep? This is a real question.
I sleep, but I get up really early.
I guess you would have to. You know, it was really interesting watching the evolution of your work. I feel like every single time I've spoken to you, I've learned something new about you. And this presentation, I learned a lot about you. You know, looking at your work today, right? Like, for those of us that follow Nyack's sketch log, you tell a lot of stories. You know, there's a lot of people, right? We learn the stories of people. But you, like you said, you draw a lot of buildings, right? And, you know, it seems to me, and looking at your work, that, you know, buildings and monuments and symbols are like equally important to you in what you're trying to convey. Like, what's so significant about symbols versus people for you?
Well, I mean, you know, I don't know. There's some psychology to it, I'm sure. There was a shift when I was in the city. I was drawing people. When I came up here, I started drawing buildings. But I think that a lot of times I'm looking for timeless symbols, and there's certain people who do rise to the level of being, you know, such powerful examples for. So Martin Luther King is somebody who I quote constantly and revere, and I draw. So some people I draw, like I draw Martin Luther King, I draw Thurgood Marshall, I draw Toni Morrison. But I also really want to celebrate collective and things that we do together. And for me, you know, building, I tend to sometimes anthropomorphize buildings. I mean, when I see a building, like there's this great story about the Grace Church and how it was built over hundreds of years, and how the first rector lived in it. There was no roof, and personally brought in those stone. And then when you look at a building too, like sometimes I'll draw a structure that requires tons of detail. So like there are literally thousands of bricks. And, I ask myself a question, well, do I just like, gesture and give a reference gently to these bricks, or do I go over each one? And then I think, you know what? Some person for their living, risk their hands and their back and sweat and cold to do this. So I can spend a second of a pen stroke on them. And I feel like I'm finding that person and remembering that person and celebrating that person. And then the purposes for the buildings. I'm often interested in buildings that are, collective, like churches or buildings that have some kind of cultural significance, like Hilburn. So, I think that these are examples of the best of us, of things that we can build that are lasting, things that we build that are for the purpose of gathering us together, things that are for commerce and for, our social function and beyond just the needs of one person or the experience of one person. And the other thing, just to comment on what Joe said earlier, the buildings are often the set or the setting, but there's always the main character. And people, when you ask them about what they've lived and what they've seen, most people are spring-loaded to tell you. I mean, you really do need to, as kind of as a writer, just get out of the way. And I'm sure as a documentarian, you see that too. They really do want, to have an opportunity and occasion. And then a lot of times people, you would think, well, no, not true. A lot of times there are typical people that that have had central roles, but a lot of other people have felt and lived some very difficult times who have never been asked, what was it like? And when you ask those people, it's very powerful that they're given an opportunity to share. So it really is just to celebrate, humanity that I, pick buildings, because I think buildings are a kind of a monument often to humanity.
Amazing. Wow. Okay. I know it's 8:05, and I have so many questions, but I don't want to hog Joe and Bill, as there may be questions in the chat. I don't know if Michael, you saw anything. Oh, okay. Here's a good. Do we have time for questions?
Sure.
Okay, so here's a question. How did for both of you, how did your deep concern for serious issues in our local community begin?
It's easy when you live in a place. You live in a place and you start seeing the fabric of the place you live in. You live in I grew up in Queens, and I became part of the roads and highways and buildings, my high school, the college I went to. You become part of it. And once you become part of it, you really start to take possession of that place. And once that's down the road, now everything that happens there is important. And it's the same thing when I came up to Stony Point, Rockland County in 1980. It was still the Wild West up here. And when we got here, I wasn't quite sure I was here or really in a Luna place. I thought it was the moon. But once I start really becoming part of Stony Point and part of the fabric here, then I began to look beyond. And I was a journalist first before anything else in Rockland. So I covered a lot of different things, and I learned a lot about this county, and I learned how rich a place we live in. And every kind of emotion is spurred by looking around you. So it begins with your eyes looking in a peripheral way.
Yeah, so I would say that for me, I think it's my family. My grandmother was an activist, and not by avocation, just by urgency, but she was compelled to be. she had a house that the government wanted to take from her. And the house was purchased by her father, who, when he bought it in 1883, they were 20 years away from slavery. So going from being property to owning property was quite significant, and to lose that property was devastating. So she was trying to fight for her father's right and the symbol of his freedom. And she stood up in a room, and it's in the Carl Nordstrom book, Nyack in Black and White. Her name's Frances Batson, and she stood up in a room as a Black woman domestic worker in 1953 and said, Rockland County is racist. And, you know, you're going to give us a couple dollars for our real estate, but nobody's going to sell us another house. So will you have us wander like nomads in the desert? And you cannot imagine how incredibly brave that was for a woman, for a Black woman, for a domestic worker who worked at Upper Nyack, who worked for people who probably did not appreciate hearing that. So, you know, I think I honor her and taking, you know, an active role, and not just an active role in, you know, civics, but an active role in some of the more difficult issues that confront us. And then the other thing is, as an artist, I think, so that's where I am as a family person, but from my family perspective, but as an artist, I think art is very powerful because it hones your powers of observation. You start to see things. And I believe that the unexamined place is not worth living in. And if you really start to look, and you really start to record, and you really start to inquire, you know, you gain knowledge, you gain perspective. And ultimately, you know, I know that people are there's a certain fatigue about what's going on in the political space right now. And there's certainly more rancor than ever before. And it's certainly more conflict. But two quotes, one from Dr. King and then one from a guy named Jim Hightower in Texas. The Dr. King quote is that peace is not the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. So sometimes in order to get to justice, you know, you have to, and to get to peace, which is the end of hostilities, you've got to go through some conflict. And the other from Jim Hightower, who was a Texas agriculture commissioner and just a real witty guy. He said, nothing in the middle of the road except a yellow line and dead armadillo. So you really do, once you observe a thing that's wrong, like John Lewis said, you've got to say something and you've got to do something.
Wow. Whew. That almost feels like a great place to, unless there are other questions, I feel like, you know, maybe that's a great place to leave us in thought. And, you know, I hate to use the word inspire because it seems like, you know, but this was definitely an inspirational evening, thought-provoking, and certainly I would hope that, you know, it illustrates how there are so many different ways to use your voice, right? To be able to make a difference or to tell a story. And both of you are really just, we're lucky to have you in Rockland County. And, you know, thank you for telling these stories and amplifying these voices. I don't even, I'm like speechless. I don't know what else to say. I don't know. Are there any other questions that have come through?
Joe, where can we see your documentary?
Well, most times in the year, it's available on Amazon Prime. People rent it. However, if you go on to Two Schools in Hilburn Facebook page now, I'm going to leave it. I put it up there for African American History Month and forgot to take it down, to tell you the truth. So I'm going to remember now to take it down, but for another week or so, I'll leave it up in case anybody wants to see it. It's on Two Schools in Hilburn Facebook page.
Great.
Great. Wow.
And somebody asked, well, you can read my column every week on Nyack News and Views. Every Tuesday, I post a new column. I'm putting my email address, wrbatson@gmail.com. If you send me an email at wrbatson@gmail.com, I'll put you on my mailing list. So you'll get every column. I think I'm like around 470 now. So I'm kind of closing in on 500. I hope to do some 10th year anniversary activities. There are 2 books I've published, and I'm hoping to publish a 3rd one for the 10th anniversary. So I'm working on the 3rd one. So you can get my book at nyackgift.com. That's my website. I also put that, I think, in the chat, nyackgift.com. And or you can get it at Pickwick Bookshop, which is where I bought my first book. I'm very proud to have my books there.
I told you Bill was a Renaissance man.
Joe, I got to keep up with you, man.
Yeah, okay. Onward.
Well, this was a wonderful night. I want to thank Joe and Bill and Cheryl for this great night. And I want to let everyone know that the Arts Festival will be returning in 2022. So follow the website and social media for updates. And just want to thank everybody for this whole month. This was really wonderful. Lisa for really putting this all together. Aviva and I were like we helped you out a little, but man, she really worked her butt off. I kept it clean. So hopefully everyone will be back to watch us again in 2022 for more arts. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.